Road's gone by morning. Stay here with me tonight. That was the first thing Cade Mercer ever said to Ava Bennett. No hello, no introduction. Just a hard jaw, blood-dried knuckles, and eyes that had stopped expecting anything good from the world a long time ago. She was supposed to be 40 miles south at a luxury resort hired by people who paid more for one dinner than she earned in a month. Instead, she was standing in Wyoming darkness with 2 broken suitcases and a storm coming down the mountain, like God himself was done being patient. If this story already has its hooks in you, go ahead and hit subscribe and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The bus didn't slow down. That was the part Ava Bennett kept coming back to, even hours later, even after everything that followed. The driver hadn't hesitated, hadn't apologized, hadn't offered a single word of explanation. He just stopped the vehicle on a 2-lane road she didn't recognize, opened the door, and when she looked at him confused, he said, "Blackthorn, this is it." "This isn't it," she said. "I'm going to Silver Creek Lodge." He looked at the sheet in his hand, looked at her, looked at the sheet again. Blackthorn Bennett, right, Ava Bennett. Silver Creek, the lodge, it's a resort. The driver scratched the back of his neck like she was the one making his evening difficult. "Says Blackthorn on my list, ma'am." "Then your list is wrong." He shrugged. He actually shrugged. And before she could pull her bags back inside, he had already released them from the undercarriage and set them in the snow beside the road like they were packages and she was a delivery. She heard the door fold shut, heard the engine climb, watched the taillights shrink into the dark until they disappeared entirely. She stood there long enough to understand that he wasn't coming back. The cold hit her the way cold only hits people who've never truly been cold before, not as temperature, but as intention. Like the weather had decided something about her specifically. The wind cut straight through her wool coat, the kind of coat that looked expensive hanging in a Chicago closet, but meant nothing against a Wyoming winter. Her phone showed no signal. The sky ahead was purple-black and churning in a way that made her stomach drop. Behind her a wooden sign swung on a single rusted chain. Blackthorn Ranch. And then she heard the gate. Chike. He came around the side of a fence post like he'd been there the whole time, working in the dark by habit, because the habit was older than the need for light. He was tall in the particular way that men who've done physical labor their whole lives are tall, not imposing exactly, but solid, like he'd been made from something harder than ordinary people. His coat was open despite the temperature. His right hand had dried blood across the knuckles from something she decided not to ask about yet. He stopped when he saw her, not startled, not warm. Just stopped the way a man stops when he's seen enough surprises to have stopped reacting to them emotionally. He looked at her suitcases, then at the mountains behind her, then back at her face. "Road's gone by morning," he said. "Stay here with me tonight." Ava pulled her coat tighter. "I need to get to Silver Creek Lodge. I'm supposed to start work there tomorrow. Can you call me a cab, or is there a town nearby, or—" "Nearest town is Millhaven, 32 miles south." He glanced at the sky once. "Road between here and there floods when the temperature drops, and that's already started. Nobody's driving it tonight. There has to be another way." "There isn't." She stared at him. He didn't flinch. He wasn't being cruel. There was nothing in his expression that enjoyed delivering bad news. He just said things the way they were, and expected people to deal with them the same way. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "You don't." "I can't just walk into a stranger's house." He looked at her coat again, at the suitcases, at the storm making its way down the mountain with all the urgency of something that had been traveling a long way and was not going to stop for anyone. "You can stand out here if you want," he said. "I'm not going to force you to do anything. But you're going to want to make that decision in the next 10 minutes. He turned around and walked back toward the house without waiting to see what she chose. Ava stood there for exactly 6 of those 10 minutes. Then she picked up her suitcases and followed him. Hog. The inside of the house smelled like wood smoke and coffee, and something she couldn't name, something that reminded her unexpectedly and uncomfortably of the kitchen in her grandmother's house in Indiana when she was 7 years old. She hadn't thought about that smell in 20 years. She hadn't thought about her grandmother's kitchen in probably longer than that. A woman appeared from the hallway, younger than the man, early 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a flannel shirt with a hole near the elbow that she hadn't gotten around to fixing or had stopped caring about. She looked at Ava, looked at her brother. "You found someone in the road," she said, not a question. Bus dropped her at the gate. "In this weather?" "Apparently." The woman turned to Ava with an expression that was simultaneously skeptical and sympathetic, which was a difficult combination to pull off, and she did it naturally, like she'd had a lot of practice reading situations quickly. "Ellie Mercer," she said, extending her hand. "That's my brother Cade, in case he didn't bother saying." Ava Bennett. "You hungry?" Yes, actually. I haven't eaten since this morning." Ellie turned back toward the kitchen without any further ceremony. "Sit down then. There's chili on the stove." Cade hung his coat by the door and went directly to the sink to wash his hands. He didn't look at Ava again, didn't offer explanations or small talk. He moved through the space the way people move through places they know perfectly in the dark, with the automatic efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste any motion on anything that wasn't necessary. Ava sat at the kitchen table. She noticed the stack of papers at the end of it, bills from the look of them. Several envelopes that hadn't been opened, one that had been opened and then set face down. She noticed the crack running through the window above the sink that had been patched with clear tape. She noticed that the refrigerator made a sound like it was working very hard and not entirely succeeding. She noticed all of this and then consciously stopped noticing because she was a guest in someone's home and it was none of her business. From somewhere down the hall, small feet hit the floor. Bonk. The boy appeared in the kitchen doorway like he'd materialized there. He was 6, maybe 7, with Ellie's dark hair and an expression of pure scientific curiosity directed entirely at Ava. He was wearing socks that didn't match and holding a picture book against his chest like it was either a shield or a treasure depending on what he decided about her. "Noah." Ellie set a bowl on the table. "This is Miss Ava. She's staying tonight because of the storm." Noah looked at Ava with the unflinching assessment that only very young children and very old people still allow themselves. "You're not from here," he said. "No," Ava said. "I'm from Chicago." He processed this. "Is Chicago far?" "Pretty far, yeah." "Did you see the storm coming before it got here?" "I did not," she said. "I should have looked at the forecast." Noah nodded seriously. "Grandpa Walter says you can feel a storm before it comes if you pay attention, right? He says his knee tells him. But Uncle Cade says that's superstition." "And what do you think?" The boy considered this with genuine intellectual effort. "I think maybe it's both." Ava smiled. The first real smile she'd had all day, possibly all week. Cade sat down across from her with his own bowl and a cup of coffee he wrapped both hands around. He still hadn't said anything. Conversational, hadn't asked her anything about herself, hadn't offered anything about himself. But he wasn't hostile. He was just quiet, in the particular way that people are quiet when they've been alone with their thoughts so long that other people's presence requires an adjustment period. "Thank you," Ava said to him directly, "for not leaving me standing at the gate." He looked up from his coffee. "I wouldn't have done that." "I know. I'm thanking you anyway." He nodded once, went back to his coffee. Ellie sat across from Noah and cut the conversation a different direction before the silence could settle again. "So, Silver Creek Lodge," she said. "You're tutoring someone up there. A family from back east, their daughter 12 years old. They rent the lodge every winter for 2 months. Ellie raised her eyebrows. 2 months? It pays well. I needed the work. Ellie didn't push further, but her expression said she'd heard the answer between the words. The kind of listening that women develop when they've been doing it their whole lives because someone had to. From down the hallway, there was a sound. A door. slow, shuffling footsteps. He was maybe 75 with white hair that had been combed carefully and a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar even at this hour. He walked the way men walk when their bodies have stopped cooperating, but their dignity hasn't gotten the message yet with deliberate intention each step chosen. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Ava with complete certainty. "Clara," he said warmly, "you're home early." Nobody moved for a second. Ellie recovered first. "Grandpa, this is Ava. She's staying the night. The storm." The old man blinked. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not embarrassment exactly, more like a cloud passing. "Right," he said. "Right, of course." He looked at Ava again, recalibrating. "Sorry about that. My granddaughter used to have hair like yours." "No apology needed," Ava said. "I'm Ava. It's nice to meet you." He crossed the kitchen and sat at his chair at the table, clearly his chair, the one with the slight indent in the cushion and the mug already set beside it, and accepted the coffee Ellie poured without being asked. "Walter Mercer," he said. "This was my ranch before it was their headache." "It's not a headache," Cade said. Walter smiled at Ava conspiratorially. "He says that." Cade said nothing, which appeared to be a form of response that the family had learned to read. Ava looked at the four of them. The exhausted cowboy, his tired sister, a boy who thought seriously about storms and Grandpa's knees, and an old man who sometimes forgot which decade he was living in and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time and almost couldn't identify at first. She felt like she'd walked into the middle of something real. The storm sealed everything that night. By the time Ava had been given the guest room sparse clean with a quilt that had been washed so many times it was almost translucent. The wind outside had stopped sounding like wind and started sounding like intention. She could hear it finding every gap in the old house and testing it. She checked her phone. Still no signal. She pulled up the confirmation email for Silver Creek Lodge, the job she'd spent 3 months applying for, the one she'd moved out of her apartment for, the one she was supposed to start tomorrow morning. She read through the itinerary, the family's name, the salary, the words private residence and professional discretion expected. Then she put the phone face down and lay in the dark listening to the storm. She thought about her ex-husband. She didn't want to, but the dark had a way of removing the barriers she'd spent the last 18 months constructing. David had said, when it ended, that she had always been a person who needed certainty, that she couldn't handle disorder, that she had to have everything controlled and arranged because she didn't trust herself when things fell apart. She looked at the ceiling of a stranger's guest room in Wyoming, at the ceiling of a house she'd walked into without knowing the people inside. During a storm she hadn't seen coming. She thought, "Maybe you were wrong about me, David." Then she heard it. 4 a.m. She woke to the sound of movement downstairs. Not urgent, just present. The particular sound of someone doing something they've done so many times it requires no thought. She got up. She went to the top of the stairs and looked down. Cade was at the kitchen table with the stack of bills spread out in front of him under the overhead light. He had a pen in his hand and a yellow legal pad covered in numbers. He was doing the thing people do when they're working a problem that doesn't have a solution, but they're not ready to stop looking for one, going over the same figures again as if repetition might reveal something different. His coffee was long cold. He hadn't heard her. She watched him for 30 seconds and felt something complicated move through her chest. She recognized what she was seeing. She'd seen it before in the offices of corporate clients during restructuring proceedings. The particular posture of someone sitting alone with numbers that don't add up and a responsibility they refuse to put down. She went back to her room. In the morning she would learn what the numbers meant. Adieng. She was up before Ellie. She found the coffee and made a fresh pot and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, which by some miracle could connect to a weak satellite signal through the window, and began looking. Blackthorn Ranch. Wyoming property records. The Bank of Millhaven. A corporation called Meridian Land Holdings, LLC. She found the foreclosure filing within 20 minutes. The number stopped her cold. $487,000. She sat back in her chair. That wasn't a missed payment. That wasn't a bad year or a late loan. That was a number designed to be unsurvivable. She heard footsteps. Cade stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her laptop screen. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. "I used to work in corporate finance," she said. "I know what this kind of debt structure looks like when it's been engineered. This didn't happen by accident, Mr. Mercer." Cade. She turned the laptop toward him. "Who is Meridian Land Holdings?" He walked to the table slowly, looked at the screen. Something shifted in his face that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, something older and heavier than either of those things. "They're the company that gave my brother a loan 3 years ago," he said. "Before the accident. Before he died." A pause. "Yes." "And after he died, did anyone audit the loan documents, the repayment terms?" Cade looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that these numbers don't match any standard agricultural loan structure I've ever seen. The interest rate escalation here," she pointed at the screen. "This clause wasn't in standard use in Wyoming lending 3 years ago, which means either your brother agreed to terms that were extraordinarily predatory or someone changed them after." She said nothing. Let him arrive at it himself. He stood there for a long time looking at the screen. Then he sat down across from her at the table where she'd found him at 4 in the morning, and he said something she wasn't expecting. "My brother was 26 years old, and he trusted people he shouldn't have trusted. Because that's who he was. He always thought people were mostly good." His voice was level, controlled. But underneath it was something that had been under pressure for 2 years and was looking for somewhere to go. "I've been trying to make it right since the day we buried him. But I don't know how to fight something I can't see the shape of." Ava looked at him directly. "I do," she said. Noah came to breakfast with the picture book again. He put it on the table beside his cereal and opened it to a page covered in words he was working on. Ava watched him move his finger across the lines, mouthing each word, stopping at some bypassing, others the particular stop and start rhythm of a child who was almost there, but not quite. "What are you reading?" she asked. "Stories about ranchers," he said. "From the old days. But some of the words are hard." "Which ones, eh?" He pointed. "This one." "Perseverance," she said. "What does that mean?" She thought about it for a moment. "It means you keep going, even when everything tells you to stop." Noah looked at the word. "Is that hard to do?" "Sometimes," she said. "But once you figure out why you're going, it gets easier." He nodded and read the word twice more to himself, committing it. Cade watched this from the doorway without saying anything. When Ava looked up and caught his eye, he looked away first. The snow stopped at noon, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Cade went out to check the cattle. Ellie went out to help. Ava stayed inside with Noah and Walter, who sat in his chair by the window and watched the valley with the particular contentment of a man watching something he'd watched 10,000 times. "This place was different once," Walter said without preamble, without looking away from the window. "When my wife Ruth was here, she made everything work just by being inside it." He was quiet for a moment. "Cade's like her. He doesn't know that, but he is. He'd rather burn himself down than let the people around him feel the cold." Ava was quiet. "He hasn't let anyone in since we lost James," Walter said. "That's my other grandson, Cade's younger brother. Accident in the south pasture." He finally looked at her. "Cade blames himself. He was supposed to be there that morning and he wasn't. So now he's everywhere all the time trying to make up for one morning." He shook his head slowly. "You can't outwork grief. I've tried." "No," Ava agreed softly. "You can't." Walter studied her with the clarity that sometimes comes when other kinds of memories start to fade. "What are you running from?" She looked at him. "Everyone who shows up at a ranch in a snowstorm is running from something," he said simply. "Ain't a judgment, just an observation." Ava looked at the window. A marriage that ended, a career that got cut short, A version of myself I thought was permanent and turned out not to be. Walter nodded. That's a lot to carry on a bus. She laughed, genuinely unexpectedly. The sound surprised her. Yes, she said. It is. Cade came back inside at 4 in the afternoon, looking like the cold had gotten into him at the molecular level. He went straight to the stove, filled a mug, and stood drinking it standing up because sitting down felt like conceding something. 3 of the fence posts on the north pasture are down, he said to Ellie. Wind got them. How many cattle? All present, but 2 of the heifers look like they might calve early because of the stress. Ellie closed her eyes briefly. We don't have the feed to keep them in the barn for extended monitoring. I know. Cade. I know, Ellie. The kitchen went quiet with the specific weight of a conversation that had been had many times and always ended the same way, not resolved, just postponed. Ava said from the corner of the table where she'd been quietly looking at the ranch's financial records for the better part of 3 hours. Your winter feed inventory, is it logged anywhere on paper or digital? Cade looked at her. Paper ledger. Why? Because if you're applying for emergency agricultural assistance through the Wyoming Rural Stabilization Program, which you qualify for based on everything I'm looking at, they need a current inventory and a hardship declaration signed within the last 30 days. The application window closes in 11 days. Silence. What assistance program? Ellie said. It was created 2 years ago specifically for family ranches operating under foreclosure pressure. A lot of operations like this one don't know it exists, because the state didn't exactly advertise it through channels that reach working ranchers. She turned the laptop screen toward them. If the application goes in clean and complete, it can freeze the foreclosure proceedings for up to 90 days while a financial review takes place. Ellie stared at the screen, then at her brother. Cade was looking at Ava. You found that in 3 hours, he said. I knew what I was looking for, she said. You didn't. He set his mug down on the counter. He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped, if the help felt like an intrusion, if pride was going to be the thing that cost them everything. Then he said, What do you need from me to start the application? Ava pulled the legal pad toward her. Sit down, she said. We have a lot of ground to cover, and for the first time since she had followed a stranger through a gate in a snowstorm, for the first time since her bus had driven away and left her standing in the dark, Ava Bennett stopped feeling like someone who had arrived in the wrong place. She started feeling like someone who had arrived exactly when she was needed. She just didn't know yet what that was going to cost her, or who had been watching Blackthorn Ranch long enough to know she was there. The application took 4 hours and 40 minutes. Cade sat across from Ava at the kitchen table, while she walked him through every section, every line, every place where the wrong word could sink the whole thing. He answered questions the way he did everything else directly, without ornamentation, without complaints about how long it was taking. He retrieved documents she asked for without asking why she needed them. He didn't pretend to understand parts he didn't understand. He just said, explain that. And she explained it, and he nodded and moved forward. It was the most efficient working partnership she'd had in years, which surprised her because she'd spent years working with people who had MBAs and corner offices and still couldn't tell her clearly what they actually needed. At 10:30, Ellie put Noah to bed and came back to the kitchen and stood behind Cade's chair, reading over his shoulder without being invited to, which was clearly something she'd been doing her whole life, and he'd stopped objecting to a long time ago. This section, Ellie said, pointing at the screen, where it asks about extenuating financial circumstances. Are we putting in James? The room shifted slightly. Cade's jaw tightened. We're putting in the loan. The loan is the circumstance. Cade. His name on those original documents might actually help. His name goes in if it's legally required, Cade said. Not as a sympathy argument. Ellie looked at Ava. Ava looked at the screen. It's not a sympathy argument, Ava said carefully. It's material information. The loan was originated under your brother's name. The transfer of liability after his death is exactly the kind of irregularity that triggers a review. She paused. But you make that call. It's your family. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it, the kind you can feel pressing against the walls. Fine, Cade said. Put it in. He stood up from the table and refilled his coffee, and stood at the counter with his back to the room for a moment. Not hiding, just taking the 30 seconds he needed. Ellie watched him and said nothing. Some things you don't narrate for people. You just let them have the 30 seconds. Walter was still awake when Ava finally closed the laptop. He was in his chair by the window in the dark, which she'd learned was something he did when sleep wouldn't come, sitting in the dark, watching the valley, the way other people watch television, like the land itself was telling him something. Did you finish? He asked without turning. For tonight. Cade needs to gather 2 more documents tomorrow, and then we can submit. Walter nodded slowly. He's not going to say thank you the way most people would. I know. But he'll remember. He finally turned to look at her. Cade doesn't forget anything anyone ever did for this family, good or bad. He holds on to both. A pause. Sometimes I think that's the thing that's going to break him eventually, carrying all of it. Ava looked at the old man in the dark and thought about what he'd said that afternoon. About grief. About running. Walter, she said, what was James like? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, loud, he said, and a smile crossed his face that was purely involuntary, the kind that ambushes you when you're thinking about someone you loved. Oh, he was loud. Cade came out of the womb serious, and James came out laughing. Those 2 boys were the same person split down the middle. The smile faded slowly. After the accident, it was like watching someone try to function with half their blood gone. Cade kept moving because stopping would have meant feeling it, so he just kept moving. Ava said quietly. He's still moving. Every single day, Walter agreed. Every single day. In the morning, the road was still impassable. She checked. She asked Cade directly at breakfast, not because she wanted to leave exactly, but because she felt she owed him clarity about her situation. About the fact that she was supposed to be somewhere else. That she was taking up space in a house that didn't have room to spare. Road should open by tomorrow afternoon, he said, not looking up from the stove where he was turning eggs. Maybe the day after. I can help with whatever needs doing while I'm here. I'm not someone who sits. He looked at her then. I noticed. The fencing you mentioned yesterday. The north pasture. I can hold posts while you drive them in if you need an extra pair of hands. Something crossed his face that she couldn't read immediately. Then he said, You ever worked a fence post? No, but I've been told I learn fast. He looked at her for another moment. Eat your breakfast, he said. We go out at 8. She was useless for the first 20 minutes and honest about it. The post driver was heavier than she'd expected, and the ground was harder. And Cade didn't sugarcoat the instruction. He told her exactly what to do, and didn't repeat himself twice, and didn't soften the correction when she did it wrong. But he also didn't make her feel stupid for not knowing. There's a specific kind of teaching that treats incompetence as a temporary condition rather than a character flaw, and Cade did it naturally, without apparently thinking about it. By the 3rd post, she had the rhythm. By the 5th, she was doing it without instruction. There you go, he said. That was all. But the way he said it, the simple, plain acknowledgement landed differently than she expected. They worked in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable silence. The working kind where 2 people have a shared task and the task is enough. Then Cade said without preamble, What happened to the career, the finance career? She kept her hands on the post. I was a partner at a firm in Chicago. My husband was a senior partner at the same firm. When we divorced, it became complicated. They pushed you out. They made it very clear that the partnership structure had changed and that my role was being restructured. She paused. Which is corporate language for yes. And you let them. She looked at him. Excuse me, I'm not judging, he said. I'm asking. You strike me as someone who doesn't usually let things happen to her." She was quiet for a moment. It was an uncomfortable question because it was an accurate one. "I was exhausted," she said finally. "I'd been fighting for 3 years. The marriage, the firm, the everything. And when it all came apart at the same time, I just ran out of fight." Cade nodded like he understood that exactly. "For about 6 months," she continued. "And then I got angry. And then I got the tutoring job, and here I am, standing in a field in Wyoming hammering fence posts." "Could be worse," he said. "Yeah," she agreed. "Turns out it could be significantly worse." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before it disappeared. They were coming back through the north gate when Cade's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his expression changed completely. She saw it happen the way a face closes when it recognizes a number it doesn't want to see. He answered. "Mercer." She couldn't hear the other side, but she could hear enough in his silence, the quality of it, the way his shoulder went rigid, the way his free hand closed into a fist at his side. "When?" he said. Pause. "How many deputies?" Pause. "I understand what foreclosure proceedings means." His voice was flat, contained. The voice of a man keeping something behind a dam by sheer force of will. "Tell Henderson I'll be in his office Friday morning." Another pause. "No, not by phone. In person." He hung up. He stood looking at the field for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "They moved the timeline up. The bank is filing the formal notice this week." Ava stared at him. "That's not standard procedure. Not with a review application pending." "Apparently they're not waiting for the review." "Cade, that's not legal. If the application is in the system..." "It's not in the system yet. We haven't submitted." He turned and looked at her. "Which means we have a window today, and then it's gone." They looked at each other for exactly 1 second. Then they both moved toward the house at the same time. The 2 documents Cade still needed were in Walter's old filing cabinet in the back room, the original deed and a bank statement from 3 years ago that predated James's loan. Walter knew where they were. He'd always known where everything was in that filing cabinet, had organized it himself the year his wife got sick, and he'd started putting his affairs in order with the particular practicality of a man who wanted to make things easier for the people he'd eventually leave behind. The problem was that Walter was having one of his difficult mornings. He sat in his chair and looked at Cade with genuine confusion and said, "I need to call Ruth. She was supposed to be back by now." Cade crouched in front of him. "Grandpa, Ruth passed 8 years ago. Do you remember?" Walter looked at him. The clouds moved. "Right," he said softly. "Right, of course. I need the filing cabinet key, the one on your key ring. Do you know where that is?" "Top drawer of the nightstand," Walter said with sudden complete clarity. "Same place it's been for 40 years. He looked at Cade steadily. "The deed is in the red folder. Bank papers are behind the insurance documents. They're alphabetical." "Thank you." Walter caught Cade's arm as he stood. "Don't let them take this place." Cade looked at his grandfather. "I won't." "Your grandfather built it. I kept it. You and James were supposed to..." He stopped. "I know," Cade said. "I know, Grandpa." He stood up and went to get the key, and Ava turned away from the doorway, because some moments aren't meant to have witnesses. They submitted the application at 2:17 p.m. Ava refreshed the confirmation page 3 times to make sure the timestamp registered before the system could update with any new bank filings. When the confirmation number appeared, she wrote it down on paper with a pen, old habit from her finance days, because digital things could be contested and paper had a different kind of weight. She handed the paper to Cade. He looked at it for the moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. "Now what?" Ellie asked from behind them. "Now the review period starts and the foreclosure has to pause," Ava said. "It buys time, not indefinitely, but enough time to build a proper case." She pulled the laptop back toward her. Which brings me to the next thing I want to show you. She'd found it that morning while Cade was on the phone with the bank. She'd almost said something then and stopped herself because the moment hadn't been right. But now, with the application submitted and everyone in the same room, she laid it out. 6 ranches, all within 40 miles of Blackthorn. All foreclosed in the last 3 years. All, and this was the thing that had made her sit very still at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning, all purchased within 60 days of foreclosure by the same holding company. Meridian Land Holdings, LLC. The same company that held James Mercer's original loan. They're not collecting on debt, Ava said. They're collecting land. The debt is just the mechanism. Ellie made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Cade stared at the screen. She watched his mind work, watched him go through it, the way you watch someone put together a puzzle they didn't know they were looking at, until suddenly the shape becomes clear, and then you can't unsee it. The Garfield Ranch, he said. And the Henley place. Those were both on that list, yes. Pete Garfield and I went to school together. He told me the bank came at him so fast he didn't have time to think. That's exactly what he said. No time to think. That's the design, Ava said. Move fast, overwhelm with legal paperwork, make the number so large it looks unsurvivable. Most people give up before they look closely enough at the documents. What are they building? Ellie asked. What does Meridian want with 30,000 acres of Wyoming cattle land? Ava turned the laptop to show them the last thing she'd found, a county development filing preliminary environmental impact report phase 1, submitted under a shell company that shared 3 board members with Meridian Land Holdings. A luxury tourism development, she said. Private resort communities. High-end dude ranch experience. She paused. The exact same business model as Silver Creek Lodge. The room went very quiet. Silver Creek Lodge, Cade said slowly. The place that hired you. Their eyes met. Ava had been thinking about this since she'd found the filing, turning it over, looking at it from every angle, telling herself it was coincidence that Wyoming was a small state, that these things overlapped, that she was pattern matching because she was good at finding patterns, and sometimes that made you see shapes that weren't there. But she kept coming back to the same fact. The bus driver had a list, and her name was on it, and the drop location was Blackthorn Ranch, not Silver Creek Lodge. Blackthorn Ranch. I don't know what it means, she said, but I think we need to find out who exactly hired me for that tutoring job, and who arranged my transportation from the airport. Cade's expression had gone very still. You think you were sent here? I think it's worth asking the question. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression she couldn't fully read. It was somewhere between the beginning of anger and the beginning of something else entirely. Why would they send you here? What does that accomplish for them? I don't know yet. She held his gaze. But I'm going to find out. Noah found her at the kitchen table at 5 o'clock with her laptop and 3 pages of handwritten notes and a cold cup of coffee she'd forgotten about. He pulled out the chair beside her without asking and sat down and put his picture book on the table and opened it with the air of someone settling in for the long haul. Are you trying to fix it? He asked. She looked at him. Fix what? The thing that's wrong with the ranch. Uncle Cade stays up late every night working on it. So do you now. He looked at his book. Ellie says not to worry about it, but she worries about it. Grown-ups sometimes say not to worry about things because they're working on fixing them, Ava said. It doesn't mean it isn't serious. Noah nodded seriously. Is it fixable? She looked at this boy, at the particular gravity of him, the way he took things in fully rather than halfway, the way he asked real questions and expected real answers. Yes, she said. I think it is. He seemed to accept this. He went back to his book. A moment later, he said without looking up, I'm glad the bus left you here. Ava looked at him. He kept reading, and somewhere in her chest, something she hadn't noticed was clenched, quietly started to loosen. She heard Cade come in from the barn at 8, and she met him in the hallway before he could disappear in the direction of his room. "I made some calls this afternoon," she said. "The agency that booked my transportation from the airport, the company name on the contract, is a subsidiary of another subsidiary. It takes 3 layers to get to the parent company." He looked at her steadily. "The parent company," she said, "shares a registered agent with Meridian Land Holdings." The hallway was very quiet. "So they did send you here," he said. "I think so. Yes." "Why?" "I don't know yet. Maybe to watch. Maybe because someone knew I'd been in corporate finance and thought I'd see something they wanted seen. Maybe because someone wanted access to information about this property through someone who didn't look like a threat." She paused. "Or maybe I'm wrong and it's coincidence. But I don't think I'm wrong." Cade was quiet for a long time. "And yet you're sitting at my kitchen table helping me fight them." "Yes." "Why?" She thought about that. The real answer, not the diplomatic version. "Because what they're doing to your family and to those other ranches is wrong, and I know how to see it, and I know how to stop it, and the fact that someone may have used me as a pawn doesn't mean I have to stay a pawn." He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not softness exactly, Cade Mercer didn't do softness in any obvious way, but something like recognition. The particular recognition of seeing someone the way they actually are instead of the way you expected them to be. "All right," he said. "All right. All right. We do this." He pushed off the wall. "Get some sleep. I'm going to Millhaven first thing tomorrow. Pete Garfield needs to know what we found. If this is a pattern, the other ranches need to see the same documents you showed me." He started toward his room. Then he stopped without turning around. "Ava." "Yeah. I'm glad the bus left you here too." He walked away before she could respond. She stood in the hallway and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Outside, the wind had dropped. The storm had fully passed. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Blackthorn Ranch, the night felt less like a trap she'd accidentally walked into, and more like a door she'd been meant to find. She just didn't know yet what was waiting on the other side. Pete Garfield opened his front door at 7 in the morning, took one look at Cade standing on his porch, and said, "I was wondering when you'd show up." That was the first thing that told Ava something was already in motion, something that had been moving before she'd arrived, before she'd found the documents, before anyone had said the word Meridian out loud in a room where someone else could hear it. Pete knew. He'd known for a while. He'd just run out of road before he could do anything about it. He was 58, with the kind of face that had been weathered past what age alone could account for the face of a man who'd lost something large and hadn't finished grieving it yet. His ranch had been foreclosed 14 months ago. He was renting a house in Millhaven now, working days at the grain co-op, and he'd kept every document from the proceedings in a cardboard box under his bed, because he hadn't been able to make himself throw them away. He brought the box to the kitchen table without being asked. Ava went through it while Cade and Pete talked. She moved fast. She'd gotten very good in the last 48 hours at knowing exactly what she was looking for and where it would be hiding. The altered escalation clause. The amended repayment schedule. The signature block that had been redated by someone who hadn't been careful enough about matching the ink density. She found it in 12 minutes. "Pete," she said, "did you sign a document modification agreement in the second year of your loan?" He frowned. "They said it was a standard annual review, just routine paperwork." "Did anyone explain what you were signing?" "The bank manager said it was." He stopped, looked at the page she was holding. "He said it was routine." "This is not routine," she said. "This retroactively restructured your entire loan at a rate that guaranteed default within 18 months. It's dated 4 months before you received your first default notice." She set the page down on the table. "You didn't miss payments, Pete. They moved the goalposts after you signed." The kitchen was very quiet. Pete looked at Cade. "Same thing happened to us," Cade said. "James signed something similar 6 months before the accident. We didn't know what it meant until Ava looked at it." Pete's jaw worked. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone down to something low and controlled that was more frightening than anger. That bank manager's name is Dale Henderson. He's been at Millhaven First Agricultural for 11 years. He personally handled every foreclosure on that list. Ava looked up from the box. What list? Pete got up from the table and went to his bedroom and came back with a second piece of paper, handwritten names and dates in 2 columns. 9 ranches, 9 families, all with loans through Millhaven First Agricultural, all foreclosed in the last 4 years. All Pete said with the same Dale Henderson signing the paperwork. Ava stared at the list and felt the shape of it snap into full resolution in her mind, the way a spreadsheet clicks when the last formula connects. This wasn't opportunistic. This wasn't a bank getting aggressive with struggling borrowers. This was coordinated, planned. Someone had identified the target properties, identified the families, built the loan structure to fail on schedule, and Henderson was the mechanism they'd built it through. "We need a lawyer," she said. "We need a federal investigator," Cade said. "We need both," Pete said. "And we need them before Henderson knows we're looking." The drive back to Blackthorn was 40 minutes, and Cade drove it in 35, which told Ava everything about his current state without him saying a single word. She let the silence run until they hit the main road, and then she said, "Talk to me." "I'm fine." "I know you are. Talk to me anyway." He was quiet for another minute. Then, "James trusted that loan because I told him to. He came to me first. He always came to me first. And I looked at the terms, and I said, it seemed like a reasonable rate for an agricultural loan, and to go ahead." He kept his eyes on the road. "I had 2 years of business college, and I thought that made me qualified to review a contract designed by people who've been doing this for decades." "Cade, I'm not looking for reassurance," he said. "I'm just saying, I told him it was fine." She understood then what Walter had been telling her. That Cade didn't carry grief like most people, he carried it like a debt, like something he owed that could never fully be repaid. And every day at Blackthorn was a payment against an amount that never got smaller. The people who designed that contract were counting on exactly that, she said, on a family member with some business knowledge looking at it and seeing something reasonable. It's called a confidence structure. The whole thing is built to look legitimate at first glance. You were supposed to miss it. I still missed it. So did every other family on that list. She paused, including people with more than 2 years of business college. He didn't respond, but something in his shoulders changed slightly. Not much, just enough. She looked out the window at the Wyoming winter going past and thought about the list of 9 families. 9 ranches. Generations of work and land and history dismantled on a schedule somebody drew up in an office somewhere and called a business plan. "I'm angry," she said. "Yeah," he said. "So am I." It was the most honest thing they'd said to each other yet. Ellie met them at the door before they were fully inside. "Someone called," she said. "A man. He wouldn't give his name. He said to tell Ava that her employment with Silver Creek Lodge has been terminated and that she should arrange her own transportation home." Ava stopped. "He knew her name," Cade said. "He knew her full name. He knew she was here." Ellie looked at Ava steadily. "He said, and I'm quoting exactly, tell her that curiosity is an expensive habit." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Cade said very quietly, "Lock the front gate." "Cade, lock it. And don't answer any more calls from numbers you don't recognize." He was already moving toward the kitchen. "Ava, come look at something." She followed him. He pulled his phone out and laid it on the table. On the screen was a photograph, a screenshot of what appeared to be an internal email. He'd gotten it 20 minutes ago from a number he didn't recognize, no message, just the image. The email was from a Meridian Land Holdings address. It was addressed to Dale Henderson at Millhaven First Agricultural. It was dated 11 days ago. It read, "Blackthorn timeline must accelerate. Outside interference possible. Move to final notice immediately and do not allow extension. Board approval confirmed." Ava read it twice. "Someone inside Meridian sent you this," she said. "Someone who apparently wants us to see it, or wants us to act on it without verifying it first." She thought for a moment. Either way, if it's real, it confirms Henderson is operating on direct instruction from Meridian. That's not a bank making an aggressive collections call. That's coordination. That's conspiracy. Is that enough for the federal investigation? It's a start. We need the original documents from the other 8 families. We need someone who can verify the forensic signatures on the loan modifications. And we need to move before Henderson knows how much we have. She looked at him. How many of those families are still in contact with each other? Most of them. Wyoming ranchers don't stop knowing each other just because the bank took their land. Can you get them together? Not by phone. In person. He thought for half a second. The Millhaven Grange meets Thursday nights. I can make some calls. Then that's where we start. He looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize, the one where he was reassessing something about her. Not suspiciously. More like the way you look at a map when it keeps turning out to be right. You know, he said. When you showed up at my gate, I thought the storm was the worst thing about that night. And now? Now I think it might have been the best thing that happened to this ranch in 2 years. She felt heat in her face and looked back at the phone screen before he could see it. Don't thank me yet, she said. Thank me when Henderson's in front of a federal investigator. Thursday came fast. The days between were not quiet. Nothing at Blackthorn was quiet for long. 2 of the heifers calved early, and one of the calves came out wrong, and Cade spent most of Tuesday night in the barn with the ranch vet making decisions that cost money they didn't have. The water heater in the main bathroom finally gave out completely. A feed delivery they'd been waiting on came up short by 30%, and the supplier's explanation was so vague and unconvincing that Ava wrote down the company name because nothing felt coincidental anymore. Noah, who had the instinct of someone much older for when the adults around him were under pressure, became very good that week at occupying himself. He read his books. He did the worksheets Ava had put together for him. He helped Walter with small tasks, finding his glasses, bringing his afternoon coffee with a natural dignity that made Ava's chest ache quietly when she watched it. Walter had 2 bad days and 1 very good one. On the good one, he sat with Ava at the kitchen table for an hour and told her things about Blackthorn's history she hadn't known when the north pasture was added, why the original barn had been built facing east, the name of every horse his wife Ruth had ever loved. He was precise and detailed and entirely present, and she wrote some of it down when he wasn't looking because it felt like the kind of thing that should be recorded. On the evening of the second bad day, she found Cade sitting on the porch steps alone at 11 o'clock. She brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him without asking. He took the cup. They sat in silence. Then he said, he knew all the horses' names this morning, every one of them going back 40 years. Then at dinner, he called me James. He wrapped both hands around the mug. Both of those things are true at the same time. I can't figure out how to hold both of them. You don't have to figure it out, she said. You just have to be there. He knows you're there even when he doesn't know your name. He looked at her. My mother had something similar, she said quietly. The last 2 years. It was hard, but she always knew when I was in the room, even at the end. You could feel it. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know that about you. There's a lot you don't know about me. Yeah. He looked back at the dark. I'm starting to realize that. The way he said it wasn't simple. It wasn't just an observation. It was a door opening just slightly, just enough to let a thin line of light through. She didn't push it. She just sat with him until the coffee was gone, and the cold got serious, and then they both went inside. Yeah. The Millhaven Grange Hall held 22 people Thursday night. Pete Garfield had made the calls, and the calls had worked, which told Ava something important these families had been waiting. They hadn't had the shape of it yet, hadn't had the documents, or the name Meridian, or the connection to Henderson drawn out clearly, but they'd known something was wrong. You don't lose a ranch that your grandfather built and believe the explanation you've been given. You carry the wrongness of it for years, quiet and unresolved, because you don't know what to do with it. Ava stood at the front of that hall and told them what she'd found. She was methodical. She showed them the documents on a projector borrowed from the Grange's office. She walked through the escalation clauses, the signature discrepancies, the Meridian ownership chain, the development filing. She did not editorialize. She did not use words like fraud or criminal until she'd laid every piece of evidence out plainly, because the evidence itself was angry enough without her adding to it. When she finished, the room was very still. Then a woman near the back, maybe 60, with the posture of someone who'd worked outdoors her entire life, said, "I signed that same modification document. They told me it was standard." "So did I," said a man across the aisle. "Henderson personally drove out to our ranch," said another voice. "He said the bank wanted to support agricultural families, said the modification would lower our monthly payment short term." "It did," said the woman from the back, "for 4 months, and then the new rate hit and we were finished." The room started talking all at once, and Ava let it run for a moment because it needed to. These people needed to hear each other, needed to understand they hadn't each failed individually, that they'd been moved like pieces on a board by someone who'd spent years perfecting the mechanism. Cade stood to the side of the room watching. He hadn't said much. He'd let her take the floor because he understood, without her having to explain it, that this was what she was built for. When the room quieted again, he stepped forward. "I'm not going to tell anybody what to do," he said. "Every family here makes their own choice. But Ava has found us a window, a legal window, and it's open right now. Not for long." He looked around the room. "I'm submitting everything we have to the Wyoming Attorney General's office Monday morning. If you want to add your documents to that filing, you need to get them to Blackthorn by Sunday." The woman near the back stood up. "My name is June Carver. Henderson took my family's land 14 months ago. My son was born on that property." She looked at Ava. "Tell me what documents you need." 14 of the 22 families committed before the meeting ended. They drove home in the dark, and Ava was running the logistics in her head: the Sunday deadline, the document organization, the filing structure. When Cade's headlights swept across the Blackthorn gate, and she saw it. The lock. The gate was open. She'd watched Ellie lock it herself on Tuesday. Cade saw it at the same moment she did. He stopped the truck and got out without turning off the engine. He walked to the gate and examined it. Came back. "Lock's been cut," he said. They looked at each other. He got back in and drove to the house fast. They went in together, and Ellie was in the kitchen, awake with Noah beside her, and an expression on her face that was controlled fear, the kind you perform for a child's benefit, so they don't fully understand what the adult is feeling. "Someone was in the barn," Ellie said. "About an hour ago. Noah heard something and I checked from the window. There was a truck parked near the feed barn for about 20 minutes, and then it left." "Did they take anything?" Cade asked. "I don't know. I didn't go out." He looked at Noah. Noah was watching him with the serious, careful attention of a child deciding whether to be scared, based entirely on how the adult in the room is behaving. "Hey, bud," Cade said with a calm he absolutely did not feel. "Go get in bed. I'm going to go check on the horses." "Is something wrong?" "Not yet," Cade said. "And I'm going to make sure it stays that way. Okay?" Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then he slid off the chair and went down the hall without another word, because he trusted his uncle completely, even when the trust required more courage than a 7-year-old should have to spend. Cade went to the barn. He was back in 6 minutes, and the expression on his face when he walked through the door told Ava and Ellie everything before he said a single word. "The winter feed," he said. "Someone put something in it. I don't know what yet, but it smells chemical." He pulled out his phone. "I need to call the vet, and I need to call the sheriff." "Don't call the sheriff," Ava said. He looked at her. "Not yet. Henderson has relationships at the county level. If someone in that department alerts him before we've filed Monday, we lose everything we spent this week building." She held his gaze. "Call the vet. Document everything. Take photographs of every bag, every trough, every point of entry. But do not call the sheriff until we have a federal contact to hand this to simultaneously." He stood in the middle of the kitchen weighing it. "They contaminated our feed, Ava. If those cattle eat it before we can—" "I know. Move everything you can tonight. Quarantine what's left. Document all of it. She was already pulling her laptop open. I'm finding us a federal contact tonight. Not Monday. Tonight. He looked at her with something that was past gratitude and past admiration and hadn't found its name yet. Then he grabbed his coat and went back out to the barn. And Ava sat at the kitchen table at 11:30 at night and started making calls into the dark. Because Meridian had just made a mistake. They'd moved from legal pressure to direct sabotage, and that changed everything. The federal contact had a name: Special Agent Diane Rourke, Wyoming Field Office, Financial Crimes Division. Ava had found her through a former colleague at 2 in the morning, a woman she'd worked with briefly 8 years ago during a securities audit, who now consulted for the FBI's Agricultural Fraud Unit. It took 3 calls and 2 voicemails and 1 direct text that said simply, I have 9 families, 14 sets of documents and evidence of coordinated loan fraud tied to a land acquisition scheme in Sublette County. I need a federal ear before Monday. Rourke called back at 6:15 in the morning. Ava was still at the kitchen table. She hadn't slept. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, and by the end of it, 2 things were true. Rourke was interested genuinely in the specific way that investigators get interested when someone hands them a thread that connects things they've been watching separately, and the Sunday document deadline had just become Saturday because Rourke wanted everything in federal hands before the AG filing, not after. Ava hung up and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table. Then she got up, made coffee, and went to find Cade. He was in the barn, which was where he'd been most of the night. He'd quarantined the contaminated feed, moved the cattle to clean water, photographed everything with his phone in the systematic way of someone who'd been told exactly why documentation mattered and had taken that seriously. He looked like a man who'd made peace with not sleeping, not resigned exactly, just rearranged around the reality of it. Rourke wants everything Saturday, Ava said from the barn door. He looked up. That's tomorrow. I know. We have 14 families bringing documents today. I know that too. She stepped inside. Cade, she's real. She's been tracking Meridian under a different name in 2 other counties. We're not the first people to notice this. We're just the first people who've managed to connect enough of it in one place to make it actionable. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her. You didn't sleep? He said. I'll sleep Sunday. He almost said something. She could see it, the thing behind his eyes that was more than gratitude and less than what it was going to eventually be held back by the same discipline he applied to everything. He picked up the coffee cup she'd brought him instead. Pete's coming at 9, he said. I'll call the other families. I'll organize the documents as they come in. We'll need a clean chain of custody for each one. He nodded, started to turn back to the cattle, stopped. You know what this means if Rourke moves on it. Henderson gets looked at. And everyone connected to Henderson, which includes people at the county level who've been running interference for years. He turned to face her fully. That's going to make some people very angry. And those people have already cut 1 lock and contaminated 1 feed supply. She met his gaze. I know. I need you to understand that clearly, not as a concept, as something real that could happen. I understand it clearly, she said. I decided that was an acceptable risk around 3 this morning. He studied her face. Why? She thought about it honestly. Because Pete Garfield's son was born on that ranch. Because Walter built this place with his hands. Because Noah does his reading every single morning at that table, and he deserves to be doing it in his own home. She paused. Is that enough reason? Something in Cade's face did what it rarely did. It opened. Just for a second, just enough. Yeah, he said quietly. That's enough reason. The family started arriving at 10. By noon, Blackthorn's kitchen table was covered in cardboard boxes and manila folders and plastic bags full of papers that people had held onto for years without knowing exactly why, some instinct telling them not to destroy the evidence of a wrong, even when they couldn't name what the wrong was. Ava worked through it all with the focused speed of someone in their element. She built a system in the first hour and ran everything through it, date loan, originator modification, date, foreclosure date, acquiring entity. Each family got a folder. Each folder got a number. She cross-referenced the modification clause language across all 14 sets of documents and found, as she'd suspected, that the phrasing was identical in 11 of them. Not similar. Identical. Word for word. That wasn't coincidence. That was a template. And a template meant someone had written it, approved it, and distributed it through Henderson's office as standard practice. She showed Pete first. He read the comparison sheet she'd made, read it again. His jaw set in a way that made the air around him feel different. They used the same language on every one of us. 11 out of 14, yes. The other 3 predate this version. They used an earlier template that accomplished the same thing through different phrasing. And this is what we give the federal investigator. This is the center of what we give her. This document alone is the clearest evidence of coordinated fraud, because it proves the modifications weren't individually negotiated. They were manufactured. Pete looked at her steadily. "You know what you're doing." "Yes, I mean that as a compliment." "I know." She moved to the next folder. "Tell the Carver family I need their bank correspondence from the 90-day period before the modification. June said she had it." He went to find June, and Ava kept moving, and the afternoon burned down fast. It was Ellie who noticed the truck first. She'd been moving between the kitchen and the living room all day, managing food and coffee for 20 people and keeping Noah occupied, and watching Walter, who was having a calm day, and had actually spent an hour sitting with 2 of the older ranchers, trading stories about Sublette County in the 80s, while everyone worked around him. Ellie did all of this with the invisible competence of someone who'd been holding a household together under pressure for so long, it had stopped feeling like effort. But at 3 in the afternoon, she came into the kitchen and said quietly, close to Ava's ear, "There's a truck parked on the county road, just past the gate. It's been there for about 40 minutes. Ava didn't look up from the documents immediately. "What kind of truck?" "Black. No plates visible from here." Now Ava looked up. She found Cade across the room and caught his eye and tilted her head toward the window. He moved to it casually, looked out, and moved away again with the same casual manner that meant he'd seen something and was processing it quietly. He came to Ava's side and said low, "We need to finish this and get these documents out of the house tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. Rourke isn't expecting. I don't care what Rourke is expecting. If they burned Pete's barn files after his foreclosure, which June Carver just told me they did, then they're not above doing the same thing here." He looked at her. "Can you get everything packaged and ready to transmit digitally?" "Scanned and encrypted, yes. Give me 3 hours." "You have 2. He straightened up. "I'm going to take Pete and drive down to the county road and have a conversation with whoever's in that truck." "Cade, a conversation," he repeated. "I'm not going to do anything stupid." She looked at him. "Your definition of stupid concerns me sometimes." The edge of his mouth moved. 2 hours, Ava. Start scanning." Done. He came back 40 minutes later with an expression that was a carefully managed version of furious. "Henderson's brother-in-law," he said, coming into the kitchen, "works for a security firm out of Casper. He said he was just parked, looking at the view." "You believed that," Ava said flatly. "Not even a little bit." He sat down across from her. "But I can't prove otherwise, and calling the sheriff right now is still off the table for all the reasons you told me last night." He looked at the stacks of scanned documents building up beside her laptop. "How far along?" 11 families complete. 3 to go." She kept scanning. "I sent Rourke an encrypted preliminary package an hour ago with the template comparison." She replied in 12 minutes. "What did she say?" Ava looked up. She said, and I quote, "This is the best thing I've seen in 2 years. Don't stop." Something in Cade's chest released audibly. Not quite a breath. Not quite a word. Just the sound of a man who's been holding something very heavy, discovering that someone else can see it too. The families left at dusk. June Carver was the last one out, and she stopped at the door and turned back and looked at Ava directly. "I lost my husband 2 years after the foreclosure," she said. "He never recovered from it, not emotionally. Some men, they put everything they are into a piece of land, and when that's gone—" She stopped, composed herself. "I want to make sure what happened to him means something." "It will," Ava said. "I promise you that." June nodded once firmly, the way you nod when you've decided to believe something because the alternative is unbearable, and went to her car. The door closed. Ava stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment with that promise sitting in her chest like something she'd have to grow to fit. Then Cade's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face changed in a way she'd learned to read. He answered it and said nothing for 30 seconds while he listened, and she watched the change move through him like weather. He hung up. "That was Tom Briggs," he said. "He ranches about 12 miles south. He's on our list." A pause. "Someone went through his truck tonight while he was inside the Grange getting copies made for us. Took his documents. Every original he had." The room went very cold. "They know what we're building," Ava said. "They've known since at least yesterday." He looked at her. "Tell me you have digital copies of Tom's documents." "He handed me the originals to scan at 2 o'clock. I have everything." She held his gaze. "But Cade, this means they have eyes inside the process. Someone who knew which families were involved." He nodded slowly. "Henderson has county relationships. More than county. Someone knew Tom would be at the Grange today. That's specific." She thought through the meeting Thursday night. 22 people, 14 who committed. She went through the faces. Who were the 8 who didn't commit at the meeting? He looked at her. She could see the discomfort of it, the idea that someone in that room, someone he probably knew, had made a call. "I don't know," he said, "but I think I need to find out." Saturday arrived with the particular coldness of a Wyoming morning that has decided to mean it. Ava had the full package ready at 8:14. Family's complete documentation, the template comparison, the Meridian ownership chain, the anonymous email, the feed contamination photographs, and a 12-page summary she'd written herself between midnight and 3 a.m. that laid out the entire fraud architecture in language designed for a federal investigator to hand directly to a prosecutor. She sent it to Rourke at 8:14. Rourke acknowledged receipt at 8:17 and said a field team would be in Millhaven by Monday. Ava sat back in her chair and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the specific exhaustion of a thing completed. Not finished, not resolved, but completed in the sense that something had been set in motion that was now larger than the people who'd started it. Cade was watching her from the doorway. "It's in," she said. He didn't say anything. He crossed the kitchen, refilled her coffee cup, and set it in front of her. Then he sat down across from her and looked at her for a long moment, the way he sometimes did, like he was reading something that kept revealing new lines the longer he looked. "You should sleep," he said. "I know. I mean actually sleep, not sit in a chair for 2 hours and then start working again. That's very specific criticism. I've been watching you for a week." She looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching, which was something she'd learned about him. He didn't look away from things just because they were uncomfortable. "I'm okay," she said. "I know you're okay. I'm not worried about okay." He wrapped his hands around his own mug. "I'm asking about the rest." She understood what he meant. He wasn't asking about her health or her schedule. He was asking about the thing underneath, the thing she'd told him pieces of on the porch and in the field, the damage from the divorce and the career, and the particular exhaustion of being a person who fought hard for things and had still lost. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. "Being here helped. The work helped." She paused. "Your family helped." Something moved across his face. "My family," he said. "Noah, Walter, Ellie." She met his eyes. "You." The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him deciding something could see the internal architecture of a man who'd spent 2 years keeping himself on one side of a line, determining whether the line still needed to be there. Then his phone rang. He looked at it, stood up immediately. "It's Tom Briggs." He answered, listened for 5 seconds, said, "How many?" Listened, said, "I'm on my way." Hung up. "What happened?" Ava said. "Fire." He was already moving for his coat. "Tom's barn. But that's not— He says he saw men in trucks heading toward the county road. Toward us." Ava was on her feet. "Wake Ellie," he said. "Get Noah and Walter into the center of the house. Lock every window you can reach." He was pulling his coat on. "I have to get to Tom first." "You're not going alone." "Ava, you are not going alone." She said it with the flat certainty of someone who had made the decision before the conversation started. "Take me. Ellie can manage the house." He looked at her. The argument was on his face, she could see it clearly. The instinct to protect the instinct, to keep her back, all the old reflexes of a man who'd lost someone and had spent 2 years trying to make sure it never happened on his watch again. She looked back at him without flinching. "Okay," he said. The drive to Tom Briggs' place took 7 minutes at Cade's speed. The barn was fully engaged when they got there. The fire had been burning long enough to be past saving, and Tom was in his yard with his wife and 2 kids 20 feet back, watching it with the particular stillness of people who understand that there's nothing left to do but witness. Cade went to Tom immediately. Ava stayed back and scanned the road, the property lines, the dark edges where headlights might have been. She heard Tom say, "They came from 2 directions at once, Cade. This wasn't random. They knew exactly which barn held the equipment." His voice was steady with the effort it took to keep it that way. "You know what that means?" "It means they're sending a message," Cade said. "It means they're out of patience." Tom looked at him. "They're not just trying to scare us anymore." Cade's phone rang again. He looked at it. His face went entirely still. "It's Ellie," he said, and answered it, and listened for 4 seconds before Ava watched something happen to him that she'd never seen before. Something she didn't have a word for, a kind of cold arriving behind his eyes that was worse than anger. "Where is he?" he said. "Ellie, where is Noah?" Ava's blood went cold. He listened, said, "I'm coming," hung up. "Noah went out to the barn when he heard noise," he said. His voice was completely level, which was more frightening than any other register could have been. "He's not there now. Ellie can't find him." For 1 terrible second, neither of them moved. Then they were both in the truck. The drive back to Blackthorn was the longest 8 minutes of Ava's life, and she'd had some long minutes lately. Cade drove with a precision that had gone past urgency into something else. The absolute narrow concentration of a man for whom panic was not an option because panic was a luxury and he couldn't afford it. She thought about Noah, his unmatched socks, his picture book, the way he'd said, "I'm glad the bus left you here too," without looking up, as if stating an ordinary fact. She thought about what she'd promised June Carver. She thought, not this on top of everything. "He went to the barn," she said. "He heard something and he went to check. He knows not to do that. He's 7, Cade, and he was scared and he wanted to help." He said nothing, both hands on the wheel. She could feel the control it was taking. "We'll find him," she said. He looked at her for 1 second, just one, because he couldn't spare more. "I know," he said. But the look said something else. The look said, "I cannot lose another one. I will not survive losing another one." She reached across and put her hand on his arm. He didn't move, didn't speak. But something in his jaw shifted just slightly, like a man accepting the weight of an offered hand. They pulled through the gate and Ellie was already in the yard, her flashlight cutting across the dark in wide arcs, calling Noah's name in the specific way mothers and aunts call when they are terrified, and trying not to sound it. "He was in his room 20 minutes ago," she said when she reached them. "I heard him talking. I thought he was talking in his sleep. When I went to check, the window was open." Her voice cracked on the last word just once, and then sealed back over with the same discipline she always showed, the same iron underneath the warmth. "His boots are gone." He took his boots. Cade took the flashlight and went to the side of the house and crouched at the window and studied the ground there with the practiced eye of someone who'd tracked things his whole life. "He went toward the south pasture," he said. "Not the main barn." He stood. "There's an old ranger cabin about 1.5 miles in. He knows it. I took him out there last fall. If he got scared and ran, he'd go somewhere he knows." Ava finished. "He'd go somewhere he thought was safe." Cade looked at the mountains. The temperature had dropped in the last hour, the kind of drop that had intent behind it. The trail's passable on horseback, not by truck in the dark. He looked at Ava. She said, "Then we take the horses." He pulled out his phone, called Pete's number. "I need you at Blackthorn right now. Ellie's here alone." Hung up. Went to the barn. Ava followed without waiting to be asked, because there was no version of this where she stood at the house and waited. And Cade didn't argue, didn't hesitate, didn't tell her to stay. He saddled the horses with the efficiency of a man who'd done it 10,000 times and handed her the reins to the mare without ceremony, which was its own kind of trust. "Her name's Clara," he said. "She's steady. Follow my lead, and don't let her stop moving." Ava took the reins. "Clara," she said quietly. The horse turned her head and looked at her with large, calm eyes, and Ava thought briefly about Walter calling her by that name the first night she arrived. She thought maybe some things run through a place like thread through fabric, connecting things that don't know they're connected. Then Cade moved, and Clara followed, and they rode out into the Wyoming dark together, toward a missing boy and a storm building on the mountain, and Ava held on and leaned forward and trusted the horse and trusted the man ahead of her with everything she had. Behind them, the lights of Blackthorn grew small and then disappeared, and somewhere out in the cold and the dark, a 7-year-old boy was sitting with one terrified calf he hadn't been able to leave behind, stubborn and scared, and exactly his uncle's blood in ways neither of them understood yet. They were going to find him. Ava had stopped being the kind of person who accepted any other outcome. They found him in 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours. Noah was inside the ranger cabin with the calf pressed against his side. Both of them shivering, both of them alive. He'd wedged the door shut from the inside with a piece of broken board, and when he heard the horses, he didn't open it. Not until he heard Cade's voice saying his name, and then saying it again, and then saying it a third time in a way that had nothing controlled about it anymore. The door opened. Noah stood there with straw in his hair and his coat buttoned wrong and the most carefully composed expression a 7-year-old had ever attempted. He was not going to cry. He had decided this. He was holding to the decision by sheer force of will. "I heard them outside," he said. "The men with the truck. They were loud and I didn't want the calf to get scared, so I brought her in here." Cade crouched in front of him in the dark and put both hands on the boy's shoulders. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You scared me." Noah's composure cracked just at the edges. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Just—" Cade pulled him in and held him, and the carefully constructed expression finally came apart completely quietly against his uncle's coat. "Next time you wake me up first. You understand? Whatever's happening, whatever you're scared of, you wake me up." "Okay," Noah said muffled. "Say it back to me. I wake you up first. Good." He held on another moment. Then he stood and looked at Ava over Noah's head. She was standing just inside the door with Clara's reins in her hand, and she was not going to talk about what was happening in her chest in that moment, or how long it had been since she'd witnessed something that felt that real. "Can you ride back with him in front of you?" Cade asked. "Yes," she said. No hesitation. Noah looked at her, wiped his face with his sleeve. "The calf has to come too," he said. "The calf," Cade said. "I promised her." Cade looked at the small, terrified animal in the corner, looked at his nephew, made the face of a man doing a calculation that has only one possible answer, regardless of the math. "Fine," he said. She walks, you ride. They came back through the south gate at just past 2 in the morning. Pete's truck was at the house. Ellie was on the porch, and she came down the steps at a pace that was as close to running as she'd let herself go. And she took Noah from Ava's arms before he'd fully dismounted, and held him in the specific way that only people who've been genuinely terrified hold someone they love, not gently, fiercely. Like the grip itself could retroactively prevent anything from having gone wrong. "Don't ever," Ellie said. "I know," Noah said. "Don't ever do that again." "I know, Mom." She held on a little longer. Then she pulled back and looked at him and smoothed his hair with one hand, and said with perfect control, "Get inside. Walter's awake and worried, and I need you to go sit with him." Noah went. Pete came off the porch to meet Cade, and the two men stood close and spoke quietly for a minute. Ava took care of the horses. She'd learned enough in a week to manage it, and when she came back out, Pete was already in his truck. He rolled the window down, looked at Ava. "Rourke called me an hour ago," he said. "She wanted to confirm the document chain. Told me to stay available Monday morning." A pause. She sounded like someone who'd already made up her mind. "She has," Ava said. "She just needed enough to move." Pete nodded, looked at Cade, then back at Ava. "Thank you," he said simply. The way people say thank you when the word has to carry more than it was built to carry. Then he drove. Cade and Ava stood in the yard. The cold was serious now, the kind that clarifies things. The kind that makes the dark seem more honest than the light. "Come inside," he said. She followed him in. Ellie had put Noah to bed, and Walter had been settled, and the house was quiet, in the way houses get quiet at 2 in the morning when the crisis has passed, and the people inside it are too tired to do anything but breathe. Cade made coffee, because it was the thing his hands knew how to do. Ava sat at the kitchen table and looked at the space where 14 families' documents had been spread out 12 hours ago and thought about how much had changed in a week. Her whole life in Chicago felt like something she'd read about rather than lived. The apartment, the firm, the marriage and the ending of the marriage and the 18 months of slow reassembly afterward. She'd thought the tutoring job was her reassembly, a clean start, a new context, a way to use her skills without being inside the machine that had chewed her up. She looked at the kitchen of Blackthorn Ranch at 2 in the morning. This is the new context, she thought. This is what reassembly actually looks like. Not clean, not arranged, real. Cade set a mug in front of her and sat across from her. They were both too tired for careful conversation. That was maybe why what came next came out the way it did, without the usual architecture, without the pauses where he chose his words like a man navigating around something. "I need to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. "The job at Silver Creek, it's gone. They terminated it." He held her gaze. "What are you going back to?" The question landed flat and honest on the table between them. "Chicago," she said. "I still have some contacts. I can rebuild." "Is that what you want?" She was quiet. "Because there's work here," he said. "Real work. The ranch needs someone who understands the financial side, the application monitoring the legal proceedings, the other families who are going to need help navigating whatever Rourke's investigation opens up." He was careful and direct. "I can't pay you what Chicago would. Not right now. But I'm not going to pretend I haven't thought about it." "Cade, I'm not finished." He set his mug down. "I've been alone in this for 2 years, not just financially, in every way that matters. And I got used to it, or I told myself I did, because getting used to it was easier than admitting what it was costing." He looked at her, with no guard up, nothing held back for once, just the plain, honest face of a man saying a true thing. "You changed something when you walked through that gate. And it wasn't just the documents and the application and the federal contact. It was you came into this house, and it felt different. It's felt different every day since." The kitchen was absolutely quiet. "That's a lot to say to someone you've known for a week," she said. "I know that. We met during a crisis. Everything feels intense during a crisis. I know that too. He didn't look away. "I've been in crises before. They don't usually feel like this." She looked at him for a long moment. At the tiredness in his face that was honest and not performed. At the hands around the mug, the same hands that had blood on the knuckles the first night she'd seen him, that had driven fence posts and held his grandfather and pulled his nephew in off the cold porch of a ranger cabin. At the man who woke at 4 in the morning with the bills and still fixed other people's fences for free, who carried grief like a debt he'd never stop paying, who looked at her like she was something he'd almost stopped believing was possible. "I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago," she said. "Before the divorce, before the firm." "I'm not asking for that person," he said. "I'm asking for the one who followed a stranger through a gate in a blizzard and then spent a week taking down a land fraud operation on 4 hours of sleep." The edge of his mouth moved. "That person I can work with." She laughed, genuine and sudden and tired. The laugh that comes out when you're too exhausted to perform composure. He smiled, then actually smiled the full version, the one that changed his whole face, and explained exactly why he didn't do it often. Because when it arrived, it was the kind of thing you wanted to keep looking at. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." Monday came, the way important days often do, without any external drama. Ordinary and cold. The sun doing what it always does, regardless of what humans are arranging underneath it. Rourke arrived in Millhaven at 9 with 2 other agents and a warrant. Dale Henderson was at the bank at 9:45 when they walked in, which was exactly where he always was at that hour, because routine is the comfort of people who believe they are safe. He was not safe. He had not been safe since Saturday morning, when an encrypted package landed in a federal investigator's inbox. But he didn't know that yet, and the 40 seconds between when he saw Rourke's badge and when he understood what was happening were, according to Pete Garfield, who was watching from across the street, extraordinary to witness. By noon, the bank's records had been seized. By 2 o'clock, Meridian Land Holdings' Wyoming operations had been frozen by federal order. By 4, a federal judge had signed a temporary injunction halting all foreclosure proceedings against the 14 families in the filing and 8 additional families whose names appeared in Henderson's records. Ava got the call from Rourke at 4:17. She was in Blackthorn's kitchen. Cade was at the table across from her. She listened, said very little, said thank you, and hung up. Then she looked at him. "It's done," she said. "The proceedings are frozen, all of them." He didn't say anything immediately. She watched it move through him, the thing that had been under pressure for 2 years, pressing against every wall, looking for somewhere to go. It didn't come out as relief exactly. It came out as stillness. The particular stillness of a man who has been braced against something for so long that when the weight finally lifts, his body doesn't know how to stop bracing yet. "All of them," he said. "Every ranch on the list." He looked at the table. Put one hand flat on the surface. Just sat with it for a moment. Then he stood up and went to the back door and stepped outside, and she gave him that minute, because some things need the open sky to be felt properly. Ellie appeared in the doorway. "Well?" "It's done," Ava said. Ellie closed her eyes, opened them, nodded once, then went back down the hall, and a moment later, Ava heard her voice, soft and low, talking to Walter. "Boy." The call started that afternoon and didn't stop. June Carver called and couldn't speak for a moment when Ava told her, and then collected herself and said she was going to drive out to where her family's old ranch sat and just stand on the property, just for a minute, just to feel it. Pete called, and his voice was rough in the way men's voices get when they've decided that feeling something fully is not a weakness. Families. Ava had never met called because the network was moving fast, and her name was attached to it now, permanently, the way some names get attached to moments. She handled all of it. She answered every call. She gave people information and referred them to Rourke's office for legal specifics, and promised to be available for whatever came next. Because there was a next. Rourke had been clear the federal investigation would be comprehensive. It would take months, and the families would need coordinated support throughout. Documentation, legal liaison, financial restructuring as properties were potentially returned or compensated. It was objectively a full-time job. Cade stood in the doorway of the kitchen at 6 o'clock and watched her end the 14th call of the afternoon and said, "Still thinking." She looked at him. About what? About staying. She set the phone down, looked at the kitchen, at the crack in the window above the sink, still taped, still waiting for someone to get to it, at the coffee pot that was always on, at the chair where Walter sat, and the chair where Noah did his reading, and the table where two people had worked through documents and loan structures and a week of mounting crisis until something important had been built. "I called my landlord in Chicago this morning," she said. He went very still. "I'm month to month. I have been since the divorce." She paused. "I let him know I'd be extending remotely for now." He crossed the kitchen in about 4 steps, and she stood up to meet him, and he didn't hesitate. He put his hands on either side of her face and looked at her for exactly 1 second. The look of a man making absolutely certain before he moves, and then he kissed her. Not tentative, not careful. The way someone kisses when they've been waiting longer than they knew, and the waiting is done. She put her hands against his chest and kissed him back. When they stepped apart, she was almost smiling, and he was fully smiling, the real version, the one that changed everything. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. From down the hall came the sound of Noah's door opening. Small feet. The particular rhythm of someone who had decided he was done napping. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, assessed the situation with the complete perceptiveness of a child who misses nothing, and said, "Are you staying?" Ava looked at him. "For a while." "How long is a while?" "We're still working that out," Cade said. Noah thought about this. "Grandpa Walter told me that when his wife Ruth came to this ranch the first time, she was only supposed to stay one night too." He looked at Ava with the direct, calm certainty of someone stating historical fact. "She stayed 52 years. Ava looked at Cade. He looked back at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite managing it. "Go wash your hands for dinner," he told Noah. Noah went entirely satisfied with the information he'd delivered. Spring came to Wyoming the way Wyoming lets it slowly on its own terms, without apology for the time it took. The snow pulled back from the south pasture first, then the north, then the high ground above the tree line, which always held winter longest, like it was saving something. The calves born in the cold of February found their legs in March, and by April were doing the particular reckless sprinting of young animals, discovering that their bodies are faster than their judgment. Noah ran with them sometimes, which seemed right. The federal investigation moved through spring with the grinding thoroughness of federal investigations, depositions, document reviews, hearings in Cheyenne that Ava attended 3 times as a material witness and once as an expert consultant on the loan structure architecture. Henderson pled in April and took a cooperation agreement. 2 Meridian executives were indicted in May. The board member who had sent the anonymous email, a man named Gerald Foss, who had spent 18 months watching the operation with growing horror, testified voluntarily and at length, and his testimony was the kind that doesn't leave rooms easily. 12 of the 14 ranch families received legal settlements. 3 recovered actual title to foreclosed properties. The rest received compensation that was not enough. Nothing would be enough, but was real and documented and represented the law finally catching up to something it had been chasing for 4 years. June Carver drove out to her family's old property on the day the settlement paperwork was signed. She called Ava from the road and said, "I'm standing here. I just wanted you to know." "I know," Ava said. "He would have wanted to know it mattered," June said. Her husband. "I'm going to believe he does." Ava didn't say anything. She just let June stand there on the phone in the spring air for a minute on the land where her family had lived, with the line between them quiet and open. The old ranch office became a schoolroom by April. It started with Noah, the worksheets, the reading, the way he moved through words that had been obstacles and found they weren't anymore. Then 2 of the neighboring families asked if their kids could come. Then 3 more. By May, it was 8 children 4 mornings a week with Ava at the front of the room doing the thing she'd always been built for and had spent years doing in the wrong context. Walter came in sometimes and sat in the back and listened. On his good days, he talked to the children about Blackthorn's history, about the land and the cattle and the people who'd worked it going back to his father's time. He was precise on those days, specific, full of detail that the children received with the gravity it deserved. On his harder days, he sat quietly and watched the room with an expression that was content in the simple animal way of a person who knows they are among people who love them. One morning in May, on a good day, he came in while Ava was writing something on the chalkboard and said without preamble, "You know what Ruth always said about this place?" Ava turned. "Tell me." "She said it was the kind of land that knows what it needs." He settled into his chair. "Said it had a way of calling things toward it. People weather trouble." He smiled. "Good things too, though. Mostly good things." Ava looked at him. "She was right about most things," Walter said. "I've found it's easier to just accept that and stop arguing." "I'll keep that in mind," Ava said. He nodded, satisfied, and opened the newspaper he always brought and never read very far into. The barn went up in June. Cade built it the way his grandfather had built the original, by hand, with help, with the particular communal effort that turns construction into something more than construction. Pete came. Tom Briggs came. Families from across the county came on weekends and worked alongside people they'd known their whole lives, and a few they'd just met, and by the end of the month, the barn was standing and smelled like new wood, and something that had no name, but felt when you stood inside it like a specific kind of repair. The night they finished, someone brought music. Someone else brought food. Children ran through the grass outside, while the adults stood around with food and drink and the relaxed ease of people who had earned an evening without urgency. Walter danced with Ellie. Slowly, with great dignity, to a song none of them knew the name of. She matched his pace without drawing attention to it, which was one of the finest things Ava had seen in a long time. Noah fell asleep against Pete Garfield's shoulder at 9 o'clock, which Pete handled with the naturalness of a man who has held sleeping children before and understands the honor of it. Cade found Ava standing at the edge of the yard watching all of it. He stood beside her. They were quiet for a while, because they'd gotten good at silence together, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, that exists between people who've been through enough together, that words are only one option, and not always the best one. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked at him. "That first night, when I told you to stay." He kept his eyes on the yard, on the people and the music and the light. "I didn't say it because of the storm." She waited. "I mean, the storm was real. The road was real. But there was a second before I said it." He paused, choosing the words carefully, the way he always did, the way that made the words worth waiting for. "A second where I looked at you standing at my gate with everything you owned in 2 broken suitcases, and something in me just recognized you." He finally looked at her. "I didn't understand it then. I do now." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Cade Mercer," she said, "are you telling me you knew the first night? I'm telling you something in me knew. The part of me that's been right about land and weather and horses my whole life." The corner of his mouth moved. "It's a good part. I've learned to listen to it." She laughed, soft and real, and entirely herself. He reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just the simple, definitive act of a man who has decided something and is done deliberating about it. She held on. The music played. The children ran. Walter sat in a chair near the barn door and looked out at the valley he had loved for 70 years, with an expression of complete peace, and somewhere in the mind that was slowly letting things go, he held on to the things that mattered: the land, the name of his wife, the faces of the people he'd made, and Ava Bennett, who had arrived at the wrong place on the wrong night in the wrong storm, stood in the June dark holding the hand of a man she hadn't known existed 10 weeks ago, and understood something she wanted to keep understanding for the rest of her life. That the wrong road doesn't mean a wrong life. That some detours are the destination. That the bus driver who dropped her at a forgotten gate in a Wyoming blizzard hadn't made a mistake at all. He had delivered her imprecisely and completely exactly where she was always supposed to be. And Blackthorn Ranch, the land that called things toward it, good things and hard things and everything that needed to find its way home, had known it before either of them did.